All right, welcome back, S'mores, to Beyond the Campfire. We've got a really spooky, spooktastic episode for you guys today. Come sit around the campfire and enjoy some spooky stories. I know it's not Halloween. We had planned to do a Halloween episode, but there have been some things that are changing, and I will announce that at the end of the episode. But right now we
Blame
got,
Jared.
yeah, blame Jared. But right now we've got Spider Man here with us, and we're ready to tell some spooky stories. Steven, you told me you got two stories,
I do indeed.
and then I've got three stories. I've got two smaller. They're like I looked up like scary stories to tell around the campfire, and I found two stories. One of them actually like I've heard of before, and it actually is kind of an urban legend. Um, Another one is just one I found on this website about spooky stories, and then I think I did the same thing as you, where you wrote a head chat GPT. I also write you a story.
Yes, indeed. That is indeed what I did. So, good. Yeah, we got some spooky stories for you on sadly the day after Halloween. But
Yeah.
yeah, if you're still in the Halloween mood for whatever reason, we got you covered today. So,
Yeah. And if you guys like this kind of stuff, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Beyond Campfire. You can find us on TikTok at Beyond the Campfire. You can find us on YouTube at Beyond the Campfire Podcast if you want to watch the video version. And then you can find us everywhere you get a podcast. Yeah. So I got some good news. Sorry to start off. If you hear anything in the background, our barn is being fixed.
oh,
So we'll
never
have the studio
bring,
back.
bring it back. Bring it back. I like it.
So, um, but yeah, I'll have a couple announcements at the end of this episode about the reason why we're kind of making this the Halloween episode, even though it's November 1st. And I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But Steven, do you want us to start us off, or should I start us off?
Let's see. You got three stories. I got two. So why don't you start us off?
Okay, because I've got two that are fairly short, and then I got one that's really long. Um, but I'll start off with this one, and it's called "The Hitchhiking Woman."
Alrighty.
Tom had just left a party and was driving down a dark road all by himself. It was about 12:30 at night and pouring down rain. He'd only driven about 2 miles when he saw this faint figure walking on the side of the road. As he got closer, he realized it was a young woman, a young lady, and she was wearing a long white dress. He pulled over and asked her if she would like a ride. She said she would, and she hopped in the front seat. He noticed she was shivering from the rain, so he took off his jacket and offered it to her. She draped the jacket over her shoulders, and they started to talk about nothing in particular. When Tom pulled up to her house, he turned to her to ask her something, but she was gone. Puzzled, he thought maybe she had already ran into the house. The following day, Tom realized the girl had left in such a rush that she forgot to give him back his jacket. He remembered where her house was and drove there since he did not have a phone number to call. He knocked on the door and an older woman answered. Tom told her he was there to pick up his jacket that her daughter had from the night before. The woman looked at him strangely and told him he must have the wrong house. The man was sure this was the right house. This was the right place he dropped the girl off, so he began to describe her and what she was wearing. The old lady was shaken and began to cry. She explained that her only daughter died 10 years ago on prom night, and that the man had described her exactly. She said her daughter was buried up the road at Meadowwood Cemetery. After Tom left the old lady's house, he decided to go find the girl's grave. There, lying on her headstone, was his jacket.
Yikes. Okay.
Not a really spooky story, kind of very wholesome.
Mhm.
But what are your thoughts on that? What would you do if you saw a random woman hitchhiking?
And really, she had been gone all along. So
Yep.
I this will get into my personal life a little bit. I don't know how many of y'all have heard of the Billy Graham rule. But the Billy Graham rule is never be alone in a room with a woman unless it's your wife, sister, or spouse.
Hmm.
So for me personally, now if the woman's like dying or really sick or just has no other help, then if I'm driving alone and I see a woman and she like really needs that level of help, then I'll give her a ride to wherever. If she if she could get help, or if help's on the way, or if she can reasonably get other help, I'll probably stay with her for a little bit. I'll call help, but I would try not to put myself in a position where I'm alone with her for a long time, if that makes sense. But
Yeah,
so maybe I end up in this story, maybe I don't. But
maybe. It very much reminds me because back when we were talking about La Llorona, the first episode of
mm,
Supernatural has something similar to that story. Similar, not fully, but it also ties in La Llorona to where I think the story in Supernatural was this woman like drown her kids in a bathtub, and she like will appear on the roadside to unfaithful men, and then she will hitchhike with them, and then when they drive her to her home, she will then kill them, and she's like this vengeful ghost. And
insane.
so Sam ends up being the one. If obviously people have probably seen Supernatural, Sam ends up being the one that she gets in the car with, and he's like, "You can't kill me because I've always been faithful." And she's like, "I'm gonna change that so I can kill you." And then he drove the car into the house because she couldn't enter the house because if she did, like her kids would get her. So then, like at the end, her kids got her and dragged her back to hell. Yeah, it's wild. All right, so my next story is actually a little bit more spooky. I've heard of this urban legend, like I've heard of it before. Have you ever heard the urban legend called the Hook?
I haven't no.
Okay, so this is from AmericanFolklore.net. So this is like I'll probably maybe urban legend, folklore, somewhere around there. It's a really good story. There's another one that was on the same website. That was one I've always heard about too, like Don't Turn the Lights. But right now we're going to read about the Hook. The reports have been on the radio all day, though she hadn't paid much attention to them. Some crazy man had escaped from the state asylum. They were calling him the Hook Man, since he had lost his right arm and had it replaced with a hook. He was a killer, and everyone in the region was warned to keep watch and report anything suspicious. But this didn't interest her. She was more worried about what to wear on her date. After several consultation calls with friends, she chose a blue outfit in the very latest style and was ready and waiting on the porch with her boyfriend when her boyfriend came to pick her up in his car. They went to a drive-in movie with another couple, then dropped them off and went parking in the local lovers lane. The blue outfit was a hit, and she cuddled close to her boyfriend as they kissed to the sound of romantic music on the radio. Then the announcer came on and repeated the warning he had heard that afternoon. An insane killer with a hook in place of his right hand was in loose in the area. Suddenly, the dark, moonless night didn't seem so romantic to her. The lover's lane was secluded and off the beaten track. A perfect spot for a deranged madman to lurk, she thought, pushing her amorous boyfriend away. Maybe we should get out of here, she said. That hook man sounds dangerous. Aw, come on, babe. It's nothing, her boyfriend said, trying to get another kiss. She pushed him away again. No, really. We're all alone out here. I'm scared, she said. They argued for a moment, then the car shook a bit as if something or someone had touched it. She gave a shriek and said, Get us out of here now. Geez, her boyfriend said in disgust, but he turned the key and went roaring out of the lover's lane with a screeching of his tires. They drove home in stony silence, and when they pulled into her driveway, he refused to help her out of the car. He was being so unreasonable, she fumed to herself. She opened the door indignantly and stepped into her driveway with her chin up and her lips set. Whirling around, she slammed the door as hard as she could, and then she screamed. Her boyfriend leapt out of the car and caught her in his arms. What is it? What's wrong? He shouted. Then he saw it. A bloody hook hung from the handle of the passenger side door.
Golly, got him. The hook.
Oh, man.
Normally, when I think of hooks, I think of that SpongeBob episode where SpongeBob and Patrick are messing around with hooks. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So beware the hook.
The hash slinging slasher.
The hash singing slasher. Wait,
Wait.
hash slinging slasher.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
That
So, yeah. I know you said like with the Billy Graham rule, like I wouldn't be in that situation where I'd be in a car alone with a woman at Lover's Lane. How would you respond to that? Like, what would be your feelings going through your head at that point? Like, you just came that close to being murdered.
I well, some of this know this about me. I've been shot at before, and by the grace of God, have survived. So I'd imagine I'd probably feel something like that again. I'd just be pumped full of adrenaline, saying, "Wow, I could have died, but I didn't."
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that right would be full in. So
So, you bring it up, you being shot. Would you rather have been shot at, or would you rather go to Lover's Lane with a woman and then when you get home, see this bloodied hook on the door handle? Because I think that would be more terrifying because, like, the bullet, like, if you guys know the story of how Stephen got shot, it was a wrong place, wrong time. Like, it was just, you know, I don't know what the word is, a stray bullet that hit him. Whereas with this, it's like that killer was like right against their car, you know?
yeah, I think I'd probably prefer being shot at. To be honest, yeah,
Yeah.
I because even with the bloody handle on the hook of the door, it's just like, oh, that thing's following me home or whatever. So
It's crazy because I think there was another Supernatural episode about that. I think
how about
it
I
was
go
either.
my two stories, and
Mhm.
then we'll finish up with your last story.
Yeah, because my last story is pretty long. So we'll let Steven take over now. I know this is weird for you guys, but we are doing both of us are doing an episode. So,
Yeah, I know, a little bit different from normal. I'm gonna start off with the classic story. So I'm actually gonna be reading a story some of y'all might have read. It's by Edgar Allan Poe. I'm reading a tell, and I checked. It's in the public domain, so we won't get copyrighted struck for this.
good.
Um, which is good because we don't want that to happen. So I'm gonna read a Telltale Heart. After that, I have a Chat GPT story where me having spider powers, Will being uh, Will being a cowboy, fight against a green goblin type creature on Halloween night. But first, let's read a Telltale Heart, and then we'll read the Chat GPT story. All right. So, Will, you've never read a Telltale Heart, right?
I when you mentioned Edgar Allan Poe, we had to read that in seventh grade. So there's a possibility I did. I just don't remember.
Okay. It's a little bit of Old English, so I'm gonna kind of explain the story before I read it, and then from there you can kind of follow. So the story is there's this young man who's narrating the story, and he lives with an old guy, and the old guy has some kind of blindness or something. Something's wrong with his eye. But anyway, the young man really just starts to hate the old man. We don't really know why, and spoiler alert. So he ends up murdering the old man. Uh, and he buries him like underneath the planks of the house. And the police come, and at first he doesn't feel bad at all, but then he starts to feel a little bit guilty. He starts to hear the old man's heartbeat. Now the old man's obviously dead, so it's just in his head. But the story kind of just goes from there. So that's the story. Um, and now I'm going to read it. And again, it's a little bit of older English, but hopefully you can follow along. But
Yeah.
I just gave that to you and the listeners just so that you guys aren't lost as I'm reading it. So, all right, here's a young man narrating the story, The Telltale Heart. True, nervous, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I hear all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how the first idea entered my brain, but once was conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the old life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then I had made an opening sufficient for my head. I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in his room, I undid the unlantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him while he slept. Upon the eighth night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To that there was I, opening the door little by little, and even not to dream of my secret need for thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he had heard me, for he moved the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with a thick darkness, for the shutters closed fastened through the fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it, steadily. The old man sprang up in his bed, crying, "Who's there?" I kept quiet, still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lying down. He was still sitting up in bed, listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening, watching in the walls. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, though I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he turned in his bed. His fears had been ever growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney, only a mouse on the floor. It is merely a cricket with a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions. All he found in vain, all in vain, black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim. When I had waited a long time very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon his eye. I saw it with perfect distinctness. All the dull blue, the hideous veil over that chilled very marrow in his bones. I could see nothing of the old man's person, only his eye, that dang eye. And now I told you not that would you mistake for madness, but acute of the senses. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. Meanwhile, in the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, louder and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. His heartbeat grew louder, louder, I say, louder every moment. You mark me well? I've told you that I am nervous, and so am I. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained, but the beating grew louder and louder until I thought his heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor, pulled the heavy bed over him, and I smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. For many minutes, the heartbeat went on with only a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon his heart and held it there for several minutes. There was no pulse. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. All right, we're almost to the end. I then took upon
Yeah.
3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited it upon the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his eye, could detect anything wrong. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I made the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was in my own dream. The old man I mentioned was in the country. As the officers came, this is the story that I told them. The police officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat and watched very cheerily. They chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. The officers just sat there, laughing and cheering, while my head ached. I fancied the ringing in my ears, but nothing more distinct. No doubt now I grew very pale. Suddenly, I heard a beat. Was it the heartbeat? Below the planks of the floor, it was a low, dull, quick sound, made the sound as a watch makes enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, but again the heartbeat continued, its high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon the sitting, grated open the boards, but the noise arose louder and louder. It grew louder and louder, still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible the police officers did not hear it? Almighty God, no, 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 they heard. They suspected, they knew. They knew and were making mockery of my horror. As I thought, as they thought, but anything was better than this agony, anything more tolerable than the derision. I could hear the hypocritical smiles. Louder, louder, louder. Finally, villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here is the beating of the old man's hideous heart. The end.
Wow.
A longer story, but
Yeah.
yeah. You would have
Dude.
gotten with it too. He was the only one hearing that heartbeat, and yet he gave himself up. So,
Well, sometimes when you kill people, that's what just happens. You get haunted.
that's it. Do you wanna do my ChatGPT story and then do your story, or do we want to do your story and then finish with my story?
How long is your ChatGPT story?
It should take like 3 minutes. It's pretty quick.
Okay, mine's probably gonna take like 5. It's
Okay.
long.
Why don't we do my story? The Spider-Man Steven and Cowboy Will story fighting
Yeah,
the Goblin, and then we'll wrap up with your story. How's that sound?
sounds good.
Okay, so here's a story of me as Spider-Man teaming up with Will to defeat a Green Goblin monster on Halloween night. All right, here goes. On a crisp Halloween night in the small town of Dusty Hollow, the air was thick with excitement and a hint of something darker. As children roamed the streets in costumes, collecting candy, an ancient evil stirred beneath the earth. A green goblin monster, long thought to be just a legend, had awoken from its slumber, hungry for chaos. In the heart of town, Will, a skilled cowboy known for his quick draw and sharpshooting, was preparing for the annual Halloween rodeo. His wide brimmed hat cast a shadow over his piercing blue eyes, and his well worn boots were ready to dance. But tonight wasn't just about rodeo tricks, it was about facing the unknown. Meanwhile, Stephen, a mild mannered law student by day, had his own secret. After a freak accident involving a rare spider bite, he had gained extraordinary powers. He could scale walls, shoot webs, and sense danger before it struck. Though he had spent months mastering his abilities, this Halloween would put him to the ultimate test. As the clock struck midnight, the ground trembled. A loud roar echoed through Dusty Hollow, sending shivers down the spines of revelers. The green goblin emerged from the shadows, its skin glistening like moss, with eyes that burned like hot coals. It shrieked, causing nearby pumpkins to explode in fiery chaos. Will, hearing the explosions, rushed from the rodeo grounds. His heart raced as he spotted the monstrous creature wreaking havoc, sending children and parents fleeing. Drawing his twin revolvers, he approached with confidence, determined to protect the town. Just as he took aim, he noticed Steven swinging down from a rooftop, landing gracefully beside him. Looks like we got a problem, Steven said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Yeah, and it's not just any Halloween spook, Will replied, keeping his eyes on the goblin. We need a plan. The goblin swung its massive claws, knocking over a candy booth and scattering sweets everywhere. You think you can stop me, little men? It cackled, the sound grating and wild. With a nod, Will and Steven sprang into action. Will used his sharpshooting skills to distract the creature, firing several rounds that whizzed past its ears, causing it to turn and snarl. Meanwhile, Steven darted up nearby a building, using his spider agility to scale the walls effortlessly. He shot webs down, entangling the goblin's legs. Now, Will! Steven shouted. With a determined look, Will dashed forward, leaping onto a nearby wagon. He raised his revolvers and fired a volley of shots at the creature's exposed underbelly, aiming for its weak spots. The goblin roared in pain, thrashing against the webs that bound it. But the goblin was resilient. It broke free and lunged at Will, who barely dodged to its side. Steven swung down, grabbing Will, pulling him out of harm's way just as the goblin's claws scraped the ground where they had stood moments before. All right, almost there. Keep it distracted, Will yelled, loading fresh bullets into his guns. I've got an idea, Steven replied. Using his powers, he scaled the nearest building again, then launched himself high into the air, flipping gracefully before landing right onto the goblin's neck. With a quick shot of webbing, he secured the creature's mouth shut, muffling its enraged cries. Will took the opportunity. He aimed carefully, channeling all his focus. This ends now, he shouted, firing a shot that struck the goblin right between its glowing eyes. The monster staggered, its limbs trembling as it let out a final, defeated growl before collapsing to the ground in dust. As the townsfolk began to emerge from their hiding places, Will and Stephen stood side by side, breathless but victorious. The goblin, now nothing more than a legend again, lay still beneath the Halloween moon. You know, we make a pretty good team, Will said, tipping his hat with a grin. Yeah, Stephen chuckled, still buzzing from that adrenaline. Next Halloween, let's stick to costumes. As the stars twinkled overhead, the townsfolk cheered, and Will and Stephen shared a moment of triumph, knowing not only had they saved Dusty Hollow, but had forged an unexpected friendship in the process. Halloween would be remembered for the adventure they had faced together, one that would be a tale told for generations.
That's great. I love that. Um, only problem, I don't have blue eyes.
I was thinking that, yeah, I don't know why it added that in, but
If you guys don't know, I have green eyes.
there we go.
All
Alrighty.
right. Now, I want you guys to look at Steven's story, right? Very happy, right? We had a great time, right? I mean, other than losing the candy booth, I had a great time. My
Yeah.
story is far from a happy time.
Oh boy. Lay it on us, Will.
It's not going to end well. Okay.
Oh boy.
So I'm going to tell you because here's the thing, guys. I don't know what Steven put in for his prompt, but the amount of stuff I had to put in my prompt to get this story, it's a little edgy. Maybe you'll think it's a little edgy. I don't know. I thought it was pretty cool. Like it's a pretty cool story. You
Let's.
guys buckled in?
I'm buckled in, man.
All right. So this is a story of Will and Steven fighting vampires.
Let's do it.
The desert was quiet, bathed in the eerie glow of the full moon. Will knelt in the dirt outside the mouth of the cave, his fingers trembling around his revolver. This was the place. The vampire horde was holed up here, and tonight they would die. They'd taken his wife Maddie, a gentle soul with golden hair and blue eyes that sparkled like the creek near their house. She'd been his entire world, and they'd stolen her from him, leaving only memories and an aching emptiness. Now they would pay. Beside him crouched Stephen, his only true friend and unlikely ally. Stephen was young and awkward, full of a kindness that seemed out of place in the harsh Wild West. He had come to Red Hollow from India, drawn by rumors of the supernatural and a desire to rid the world of evil in Jesus' name. Despite his nervousness, Stephen's faith was ironclad, his eyes fierce with determination as he held his cross and murmured a prayer. Will shot Stephen a quick glance. You good, Stephen? As good as I'll ever be, Stephen said with a shaky smile. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared, but I have faith in us, Will. Will grunted, gripping his revolver tighter. Just remember what we came here to do. They crept towards the cave, moving like shadows. The air grew cold. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of decay. Bones littered the ground, splintered and cracked, testaments to the vampire's endless hunger. Inside, they could see the dim glow of a fire flickering on the cave walls. The vampires were gathered around it, pale and twisted, their red eyes glinting in the darkness. At the center of the group stood a tall figure in a long black coat, their leader. He had a gaunt face and hollow eyes, and a cruel smile tugged at his lips as he saw them approach. Will felt his blood boil. This was the creature that had taken Maddie, that had laughed as he left Will to grieve. He raised his revolver, aiming straight for the leader's heart, but before he could pull the trigger, Stephen stumbled, his boot scraping against a loose stone. The vampires turned their faces, contorting with hunger. In an instant, the fight was on. Will fired each bullet, hitting its mark, sending vampires into fits of shrieking black smoke as they collapsed in the dust. Stephen fought beside him, clumsy but unflinching, wielding his cross like a shield as he drove his stakes into any vampire that got too close. They fought their way deeper into the cave, each step more desperate, each strike harder. But as they neared the heart of the cave, the weight of exhaustion bore down on them. They were both bleeding, their breaths coming in sharp gasps. Yet Will's rage drove him on, kept him standing when he knew he should have collapsed. And then he saw her. At the back of the cave, standing just beyond the fire's reach, was Maddie. She was pale, her blonde hair spilling over her shoulders like a curtain, her blue eyes empty, but still unmistakably hers. Will's heart stopped. She was there. She was here. Somehow, against all odds, she was here. Maddie, he whispered, his voice cracking. She was a vampire now, her eyes glinting with an unnatural red, but he couldn't tear his gaze away. Part of him screamed to run, but another part, a part he lost, ached to hold her, to pretend even for a moment that she hadn't been taken. The vampire leader chuckled, his voice a sick, mocking rasp. You recognize her, don't you, Sheriff? She's beautiful. Will's hands shook as he aimed his revolver. Torn between rage and grief, he could hear Stephen's voice, distant, urging him to act, to end her suffering before she was lost entirely to the darkness. But his heart refused to let go. Maddie, he whispered, his voice a broken plea. It's me. It's Will. For a brief moment, her eyes softened, the faintest hint of recognition flickering in them. She took a hesitant step forward toward him, her lips parting as if to speak, but then her face twisted, the hunger overtaking her, and with a snarl she lunged. Will staggered back, barely deflecting her attack, his heart shattering as he watched the woman he loved attack him with feral fury. She was gone, he realized. Her soul lost to the creature that had taken her place, but he still couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. Will, you have to, Stephen shouted, rushing forward with the cross held high. Maddie hissed, recoiling from the holy symbol, her face a mask of hatred as she turned her attention to Stephen. Don't you touch her, Will roared, but it was too late. Maddie moved with blinding speed, closing the gap between herself and Stephen in a heartbeat, her fangs sinking into his shoulder before he could react. Stephen gasped, his hand clutching at her arm as she drained him, his body going limp as his life slipped away. Will's mind screamed, rage and horror swirling together in a single blinding surge. With a strangled cry, he charged forward, pulling Maddie off of Stephen and driving a stake through her heart in one swift, heart-wrenching motion. She looked at him, her eyes wide, the hunger fading as her body began to crumble. Her lips moved, forming the faintest of smiles as her face softened, and for an instant, she was Maddie again. But then she was gone, her body collapsing into ash that scattered in the air. Will fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he reached for the remnants of his wife, a hollow ache echoing in his heart. Will? Stephen's voice was faint, a weak whisper. Will turned to him, his stomach twisting as he saw the bite marks on his friend's neck, the red glint starting to grow in his eyes. Stephen, no. Will's voice broke, his mind spinning. He'd lost Maddie, but losing Stephen too, he didn't know if he could bear it. Stephen managed a feeble smile, his hand clutching the cross around his neck. You know what has to be done, Sheriff. Don't let me become one of them. Will's throat tightened as he knelt beside Stephen, gripping his friend's shoulder. I'm sorry, Stephen. I don't want to do this. Stephen's eyes softened, his gaze steady despite the pain. I'd do it all again, he said, his voice fading. I'm glad I could be your friend. Will closed his eyes, whispering a shaky farewell as he raised his stake. He brought it down swiftly, a silent promise that he'd make it quick. Stephen's body crumbled to dust, the last traces of his friend slipping through Will's fingers. He sat there for a long time, the silence pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't lift. The woman he loved, the friend he trusted, they were both gone, lost to the monsters that had taken so much from him. But as he stood, his face hardening, he knew he still had a purpose. The leader, the creature that had taken Maddie, was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until he ended every last one of them. The first rays of dawn began to creep over the canyon walls, casting a warm glow on the dust and bones scattered around him. Will holstered his revolver, his heart hollow, but his resolve stronger than ever. He was alone now, but he would make sure the vampires knew the full weight of what they'd done.
That was dark, man.
I know.
That was good though. I liked it. That was something indeed.
Oh yeah,
Maddie. Oh man, yeah, Maddie in there. That's crazy.
yeah. Because
Does
the prompt I put in,
the s'mores know who Maddie is, right?
yeah, that's my wife. If anybody
Okay.
doesn't know, that's my wife. Like, everybody knows that I'm married. I've got a kid on the way. If you didn't know, Maddie is the name of my wife. Because originally when I had it write the story, and I was like, the prompt I asked was, I was like, all right, write me a really cool story about these guys that are hunting vampires. You got the sheriff, who's me, whose wife was taken, and then you got Steven, who's an Indian and I was like, he's not like, when I said Indian, I had to put like from India. So that's why they made it to where you migrated from India.
That's fair. Yeah. They're just damn thing.
But I think that was a pretty dang good story.
No, yeah, I like that a lot. So that was amazing.
What's really sad is there's a lot of elements in the previous stories that I liked that they didn't keep in this one, because the one before that I liked a lot, but it gave, like, because I didn't give them my wife's name, they put some random name, and I could have just gone in and changed it. I didn't have to tell ChatGPT to change it, but they did, because in the original one it wasn't actually Maddie who killed you, it was the vampire leader.
Oh, I see.
But it had a really cool line from the original ones that I'd seen. It had a pretty badass line at the end where it was, as he walked out of the cave, the stakes on his belt hung a little heavier.
Oh, that's
I was
good.
like, that's really cool, but didn't put it in there. That's the sad thing. So
Cool.
happy November 1st, everybody. Thank y'all for watching. It's technically Halloween. Hopefully none of you got cavities from last night.
Don't eat too much candy.
Yeah. You get sick doing that. So, but thank you, S'mores, for watching. Yeah, that's right. I forgot I got to mention about what my idea was of the reason why this didn't happen on Halloween. So we had an idea. We were going to originally actually film at on location of a place to do our Halloween episode. Didn't happen because our audio guy, the guy that was supposed to get the equipment, kind of flaked out on us. We're not going to get into that. But the thought going forward is I know that next year Halloween falls on a Friday.
True.
So it's like, do we put out one episode of our normal stuff, or we put out a second, or we do we do 2 episodes on Friday, or do we do 1 episode and that be our Halloween episode? So obviously this year, this is our Halloween special. The Halloween special is what is being put on, even though it's November 1st and it's not Halloween.
Right.
Starting next year, because hopefully by that time next year, we will have the Patreon fully launched. So the idea is the Patreon, the 3rd tier, probably won't happen for a little while. Even though Steve and I might be able to start doing this as a full-time job, hopefully next year, we won't be able to do the 3rd tier of the Patreon just yet, because the 3rd tier of the Patreon is going to take a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of resources to get to that point. So I'm looking at it. We might launch the Patreon on New Year's. Might. If we don't do it on New Year's, we'll do it around our 1-year anniversary time. We're only going to have 2 tiers for right now. Tier 1 is just going to be a cheap $2 tier, to where it's like, hey, thanks for what you do. You know, you might get, I don't know, something cool in live streams. I don't know. I have to figure that out if there's a way to link that. But either way, tier 1 is just like a $2 thing a month, saying, hey, we appreciate you. We're glad you like the content. Tier 2, the next tier up is tier 5. Tier 5 is, or not tier 5. It's $5, not 5, not tier 5. Tier 2 is $5 a month, and that'll be where you might get an extra episode every now and then. It'll be also a thank you to us for what we're doing, you know, and so you'll get that, and then so it'll be $5, and so you'll, like I said, so next year on Halloween, hopefully the Patreon will be launched. If the Patreon is launched, those of you who are subscribed to tier 2, not only will get a regular episode on Halloween night, you will also get another spooky-tastic episode from us, which this time we will hopefully be able to do all the stuff we need to do in order to get that episode what it needs to be. Because the idea behind the Halloween episode was originally we're going to go to an actual location near us that is haunted, sit there, tell the story, and then we'd go through our normal, like, little scary stories we told here today. So that's the idea for Patreon. That's the plan we got going for Patreon. I've just got to finish setting up the tiers. And then once I get the tiers set up, obviously we got to get our numbers up before we launch Patreon. Just because I feel like it's a little weird to launch Patreon if we only got, like, you know, a handful of viewers every now and then. So yeah, if you want that, if you want some cool extra episodes, it'll be like a Halloween special. You might get like a St. Patrick's Day special. During the month of summer, you might get an extra episode every week that is more summer themed stories. You know, you'll get an episode released on Christmas, so you can sit around with your family, watch Beyond the Campfire. You know, I mean, be around the fireplace, you know, with chestnuts roasting. But hey, that's something I want to do because I love doing this with Steven. We love that you guys support us. We appreciate you guys supporting us. We hope this is the first of many, many, many episode specials. And yeah, this is us signing off. We hope you guys had a great episode. Hope you guys had a great Halloween. And we'll catch y'all next time.